Well, for an old retired guy, I had a lot of stuff going on.
You and Jerry.
Yeah, I hear that.
So
Actually, some of it had to do with surveying field. I got a call on a survey that I did back in 1980 that had been redone for a sale, and an engineering firm had differed with what I had for a boundary for this tract.
Mhm.
It was in an old subdivision that was in a rural area, and it involved one of the topics that we talked about a few chapters ago about remainders.
Mhm.
And it had to be a lot that was on the south side of this subdivision. And the south side of the subdivision was noted on the plat as being the south line of this 40-acre tract. Well, the subdivision showed that piece as running from the north boundary of the 40-acre tract to the south boundary. Yeah, and it was laid out to the north boundary, and it was showed as 1320 for the total distance there. Unfortunately, all of our sections are quite long by today's measurements, and there had been a survey in the 1930s that showed this 40-acre thing north to south to be something like about 1,308 feet or something like that. And I had included on the back of the lot that I did the 8 foot as owned by that lot owner. And the later survey that was done recently uh, didn't like that. They wanted the original subdivision plat to be followed, and that's fine. But who owns that 8 foot down there? It sure isn't the guy that owns the 40 acres to the south of that. He has no color of title that would entitle him to the 8 foot. It's part of the remainder. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see whether that generates into litigation or not. But it was one of the things that we talked about a few weeks ago.
I've got one right now where I'm butting up against another surveyor, and there's two ditches that run parallel, and then the fence is like way off the ditches. And I agree the fence is not a property line here, but it's where is the property line in between the ditches? It doesn't describe it very well, and it's kind of a remainder piece, and we're having a good friendly discussion about resolving where that 3 or 4 feet go, but that's always the thing is how do you resolve it. And of course the client wants to close on the property right now in the next 2 weeks, and it's going to take time. It's always fun.
It did occur to me here over the last couple of weeks that Wattles, in writing his book, I think he was writing that for the benefit of title people who were writing the descriptions rather than surveyors. And in some cases, what he cautions people not to do, I think he's right on people who are not surveyors. Back in that time when that book was written, those descriptions, the people that were writing those descriptions probably really didn't have any education that would qualify them for correcting deeds that are ambiguous or have problems. They certainly didn't go out and make any field observation about what might be going on out there. They were limited really to the color of title that they were looking at. So I guess I view Wattles in a different view now than I did a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I like it. Good.
Yep.
Whenever someone would come to me and ask for a survey, there's several kind of things there that you could provide for them. Some of them might come in and say, here's my deed. I want you to survey my deed. Well, that's fine. You could take their deed, ignore all the other records of the county, and go out and measure out what it says on that deed. Fact is that in my area, your chances of that being what the guy really owns, his legitimate ownership lines, is not good. If I told that guy, I will do that for you, but that's probably not going to be what you own. You own something more or less from that. What you got in your deed is evidence of ownership, not proof of ownership. And so in that case, I think most of the guys would say, well, that won't really do me a lot of good. I want to know what I own. So that's kind of what I looked at. And that's not limited to the deed. It's not even limited to what's on record, the record title. So you got several things there that Wattles sometimes works around that. And one thing he will call about marketable title, there's the deed itself, color of title. Then you've got the greater record title. And then you've got on the ground, what is the ownership line? What do you survey? What are you going to give this client of yours for an opinion?
I think you're hitting
Yeah.
it right where we need to start here, James.
Yeah,
Exactly. I love it.
I think, yeah, James, the conclusions you came up with, who the book was written for, I think is right. And if you look at it, it is titled Writing Legal Descriptions. It's not determining ownership boundaries or determining ownership extent or anything like that. It's strictly writing legal descriptions. So yeah, there is a limitation on it. And I think we as surveyors look beyond some of the stuff that he's talking about here and think about, well, yeah, how do we resolve when there's a difference between what's written and what's on the ground or the physical evidence that we have to resolve?
Oh, you mean the evidence and procedures for boundary location?
Yeah, that's a different audience, right? I mean, that's not written for a title person. Right? A title person would look at that, they wouldn't understand what we're talking about in there. Well, we got to understand every aspect of it because we have to interpret what somebody writes down. Right? Whether we're the author of the description or not, we're still responsible for interpreting it and applying it on the ground.
Well, are we going to put on the ground what we find in record title? Or are we going to put down our opinion as to the ownership?
Well, that's what I'm getting is resolving, the conflicts or differences between what's written, what's physical, and, all that kind of stuff is we have to sort through all that.
So maybe there's some terms we ought to throw out here, and you guys have used some of these, but maybe we define them real fast. And I'm gonna before we do that, the next two kind of headings in this chapter: lines of title versus monuments, and lines of title versus occupation. And so in title, there's different terms we use, and again, you guys have thrown out some of these. Maybe we define these. So, marketable title. If we were to define marketable title as a term you guys used, how would we define that?
I would say that marketable title is record title. It may not be ownership, but it is what you have on record. And that's all that you can market. If you actually own something more than that, then you need a survey and you need a quiet title operation to bring that into a marketable title situation. That would be my what I would tell the client.
So if the client, I mean, to put it in different terms, then if the client were to sell his deed, just the deed, what does he have the right to sell by deed? The four corners of that document?
Yes, I would not recommend ever changing a description because that it's has defects in it, or it has, or you find a different situation on the ground there that would indicate that he has an ownership line that does not correlate to what his color of title is. And the reason I say that is because whatever that color of title is, whatever the DE acquires, when he sells it, if you use the exact same language, the new grantee will get everything that he owned. If he actually owned more, he will get more. But if he owns less, then there tends to be a problem. And so, you know, even though a description is defective, if you're transferring the same piece of property, I see no reason to rewrite that description of the deed. Now, the survey should always indicate the opinion of the surveyor, and he should make clear on there if there is a difference between the color of title and what ownership is. In his opinion, it should be clearly shown on that plat. But I don't know. It's my way of working things out.
Oh, I agree. So maybe to throw another term in here is so we've talked about marketable title or market title, and so record title would be the same thing, right? The corners of the deed, the document itself, right? And James, you throw out the caution, we're not going to change record there. And then you know, another one, we've talked about this a little bit or hinted at it in our UCLS conference this year. We had a great discussion by a surveyor, county recorder. You know, so we talked about record title versus occupied title, insurable title. So, you know, we've talked about record title or marketable title. How about like occupied title or a different type of title there? Jerry threw into the chat here, marketable title is a concept in property law referring to a title free from any claims or disputes about the ownership or free from any threat of litigation. When a seller is selling property to a buyer, an implied promise is that the seller will deliver marketable title to the buyer. A marketable title may be referred to as good title, merchantable title, or clear title.
That's from the Cornell Law School. I just want to point that out. That's the legal side of things, how they define marketable title.
So is that then what's normally accompanied by some sort of title insurance, a warranty deed, title insurance that then proves that it is marketable?
I don't think it has to have title insurance to be marketable, considered a marketable title. By virtue of using a warranty deed to convey property from grantor to grantee, there's an implied warranty of the marketability of that title. Special warranty deed only limits any actions from the grantee's ownership forward, not anything that happened before. But anytime you have warranty in the title, in the deed just type, then you have the question of marketability comes into play and a guarantee on the part of the grantor. And that's, you know, the quitclaim deed, you know, that there's no guarantee of marketability with a quitclaim deed, right? So title insurance is just something else. It's another layer of assurance that somebody wants, either the mortgage lending institution, because they're on the hook for a bunch of bucks for this, or it could also be the buyer, could be buying separate title insurance. But it's not always the buyer that buys it and that type of thing. But what is title insurance insure against? Throw that back to the group. What is title insurance insure against? Does it insure against adverse possession?
Well, they put as many exceptions in there as they can, so they don't have to insure any of that, right?
No, they specifically exclude anything that the ground survey will show. No, they're primarily ensuring the marketability based on a written record. So if there's any defects in the written record, they're identified and excluded from the contract, so that at least you know a defect exists. If they miss a defect in there, like and the easement drops off and they miss that, and then later on the grantee is damaged financially because of the implementation of that easement, then title insurance would pay for that because that's something that they missed. But that's a matter of public record. They don't insure against anything that's not a matter of public record.
Down here, we have an inclusion on those title policies that the language is something like they exclude anything that would be show up from a correct survey. You know, in other words, if there's something wrong with the survey, well, they're not gonna come forward with any liability on their part, and so that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because what do you have with what is a correct survey? I mean, surveys are the opinion of individual surveys, but how can you say that one survey is correct and one is incorrect? I can understand that one survey might be better than another survey, but to call one correct and one incorrect, I don't know. I have a problem with that. It's like saying, you know, if you have attorneys and one wins and one loses, are you saying that one attorney was right and the other one was wrong? You ought to sue him for being wrong? The same thing happens with doctors. You know, one doctor diagnoses one thing and another one diagnoses something else, but one is not correct and the other totally wrong. And you can't get away with suing them for it. So I don't know. I see surveyors in the same light, and I don't understand exactly what a correct survey might be.
Yeah, I would think correct survey is one that meets the standard of care for the area you're in, right? One that's gone through and done their due diligence, if you were to define it.
Well, that's what they're going to have to prove if they're going to try to sue you as a surveyor. They're going to have to prove that you violated what is ordinarily common for professionals in your area.
Yep. Just one other term that's kind of been thrown out here is color of title, right? And so I just did a little Googling here, and Jerry can probably pull out some law school definition for sure, but just a quick it's the documents evidencing a title, you know, the color of title, they're the documents that prove that or show that. That's just my quick little Googles there to define it more properly than what I would just say in my layman's term. So jumping back over to the book here, we've kind of talked about what title is. Title is the ownership, the documents behind that. And then as surveyors, we know that what that deed says may actually be different than what you truly have rights to. And our job is not to determine what rights are there, and may not even determine where those rights are, but our job is to show how that deed lays out on the ground and where those rights might be, meaning, the four corners of the deed lay out this certain way, but the fences and occupation lay out this certain way. And so there might be an ambiguity or discrepancy between written title or record title and occupied land. And so there's some caveats of how we resolve that. We've talked about that through here. And then, one of the things that Wattles throws out here, the next thing is lines of title versus monuments, right? We get this document, we go out there and we survey it, we lay it out, we tie it to government monuments, record monuments, and the lines of the deed don't match property corners found on the ground or the monument set. And what do we do in that case? And so he says some discussion has been had in regarding monuments and their acceptance or non-acceptance. In writing descriptions, we again have the distinction to make between using or perhaps revising existing descriptions and creating all new descriptions. Insofar as monuments versus lines of title are concerned, three principal items need to be remembered and considered. One, are the monuments specifically cited in the description? So we've talked about this a little bit. Of a really good description might start calling to, I found this monument. Here's how I describe it, right? Whether it's a section corner, brass cap dated 1963 in this location, in this condition, right? And we know in future time, if you were to go retrace this deed and you don't find that same monument, it might throw up a red flag. Two, were the monuments set sometime before the description was written? Were they set at the time of writing the description? Or were they set at an appreciable time after the creation of that description? So in Utah, we have 90 days to file our survey after setting corners, right? And so did we go set the corners, finish the survey and file it? We were good enough to go set the corners first trip out. We go through and draft the survey and create this document that shows we set the corners and then, file our record of survey. Or in the case of an original survey or a subdivision plat, right? I'll go set those corners sometimes again a year after the subdivision plat's been recorded because construction's going on, right? And they're going to rip out those corners or, and we'd have to go back and reset those. So when were those corners set versus the deed? And what were the intentions of the parties? And we've had quite a bit of discussion about determining the intention of that in the first part of this book. And he gets into the rules of construction about how we write those. Any questions or comments about lines of title versus monuments? Any other thoughts that you guys had on that one? We always teach that monuments hold, right? When you find those, that would hold in retracement.
We've got one we're dealing with right now that it's been over a 50-year span, and there's about 4 to 5 tenths difference over those 40 to 50 years. And so it's dealing with those, but the walls or the lines of occupation do not match anything on the ground by about a foot and a half, right? So they constructed the walls later with or without a surveyor. And so now we're in this position of them having to basically merge and resub is what we can't do boundary line adjustments and mostly in Nevada. So, or at least in Clark County. So we'll have to do like a merge and resub parcel map to redefine those lines so that they match occupation lines.
Is that like an amended plat or these meets and
It'll
bounds
be
parcels?
no, there'll be amended plat, amended parcel map. So merge and resub parcel map. So, yep.
I'd like to say that I followed a lot of very old subdivisions, a reconstruction to gain one lot out of something that was done 60, 70 years ago. And usually whenever I go in there and do that, I will find a lot of stuff that just looks terrible compared with the plat will fall out. But if I go far enough and gather enough information and put that into a computer as a graphical model, a mathematical model of what I found, and then I put another model of the subdivision obtained from the subdivision plat, and then I overlay one over the other and move them around until I start seeing a fit. And most of the time, I'll find that there is a certain number of those monuments out there that will again fit exactly what I'm finding on the ground. In other words, the people that did surveying 60, 50, 60, 70 years ago were not incompetent. They often laid out property with remarkable accuracy. And it may not be the accuracy or the precision that we have now, but it was pretty good. If you find stuff that just looks wild, you're probably in the wrong ballpark. That's my opinion, and you need to look farther, because those guys were not incompetent. At least most of them weren't.
When Trent's got his surveys talked about, you can see those walls and
Yeah, you can
the
just,
property line calls off of that.
yeah, correlation shift in just these particular walls. And I've done some surveys similar where, you know, they didn't have somebody surveyed and that they didn't put in the sidewalls in a subdivision 50, 60 years ago, and somebody put it in and they just started measuring down 115, 115, 115, right? And every one of them you can tell is off, and like in this whole subdivision. So this particular one is a different story, but I mean, they did well on some walls, but you know, it's this particular, and then this one got a little skewed towards the end, but yeah, it's and crazy. And the guy owned all 4 lots at one point. And then they started selling off lots. And so now this guy owns this lot and this lot and this lot. He owns everything but the rest of the houses. And now they're throwing a fit about these walls here. But so the purpose of our exhibit at this point is to basically say, you've lost a foot here, or you've gained a foot here, but you've lost a foot here. So it's an equal loss, basically.
Yeah.
We just got to go through and remap the parcel. But yeah, so it's of course, like anything, it's a big old suit over this. So fun time.
I had the thought process earlier this week reading through here and some stuff I have going on that, you know, the issue isn't necessarily with surveyors or how we measure it. It's really with how readily available some of the information is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back in the day where you didn't have a recorder's office and a GIS map, and I'm not laying it on their feet, but
yeah, it
was really easy for a surveyor to go out there in a case like this. This is a great example that Trent's got up here.
Yeah.
And say, look, I'm measuring with a tape measure, a chain, right? And I can get so accurate with it, but this occupation has been here long enough. It's really easy, I think, in a lot of people's minds to hold then the walls and the fences and feel like they've been made whole and have what they have rights to. But the problem is all this information is so readily available. It's really easy to get worked up over, you know, the minutia of it. And the hard thing as surveyors is we get caught up in that too, because we can measure better. We've got a GPS and we've got this and we've got all these records. We've got past surveys to go through and we can track it through time. And explaining that to a client is difficult sometimes when they want to be made whole and have what they've paid for, especially as expensive as land can be. Yeah. Even if you're talking about a foot across, you know, a little bit there.
This would be, I guess this is a prime example for where we're kind of at right now. So this was a 5H rebar that was found, but it's, you know, and if you look, it's pretty close to what would be the west face of that wall. Well, it is more than a half a foot off, and it wasn't set as part of the original subdivision. I mean, that would have, we just don't know the pedigree of where that quote unquote rebar came from, right? So that at that point, we're just disregarding it altogether because it's more than a half a foot off. There's just a plain rebar, no cap, no identifier, no nothing. You don't know how it got there. It could have been just leftover rebar from when they built the wall, right? So it just,
Yeah.
it's so that's the tricky part, I guess, sometimes with holding, you know, occupation lines and monuments and that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty good example of where we're at right now. This is one we were just messing with today. So
The fence guy pulled the rebar out to put the wall up.
yeah,
Buried it right
Yeah.
next to it. Well, this will monument it here, and this is good enough. And
yeah,
he doesn't know any different, right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, did you find some monuments out there within this block of this subdivision that were in the correct location?
no original corners, and somebody just, another surveyor just came behind like 4 years ago and said a bunch of stuff. So it's been going on this. So the other surveyor was surveying for this client and but yeah, there's not a single original survey left, original monument left that would have been done per the plat. So
How about replacement, monuments? that
yeah,
were
those,
in it?
yeah, those are in, and so we've proportioned the block based on that. And so yeah, it's messy.
And we've talked about proportioning in past chapters too. So there's a good,
Yeah.
good thing to go over
Yep.
there.
How do y'all feel about, what they call the pin cushion, scenario? You go out there and there's 3 or 4 rebars and around an area that might vary by a foot or two. What are
So
your ideas on that?
I think it gets what I was just talking about. A lot of times we feel we can measure tighter, right, than someone else, or we have more evidence, and it really gets down to, you know, making that call to the other surveyors. If you don't match, ask why you don't match, right? Don't just send it and say, I have more information, I have the right information, I've interpreted it right. You have to, you have a professional obligation to call and have those discussions and see how they determine what they did.
And of course, fingers crossed, James, join us in September as we do the pincushion effect for the next book.
Well,
Nice. Awesome.
I'd have to say, I hate to see that, but
Oh yeah, of course.
because it makes surveyors, it gives us a bad reputation with the public.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, if we actually are coming out there and coming up with different results, maybe the truth of that is something we ought to shoulder up. And I like what was said there about calling the other surveyors and seeing if you can't come to a conclusion about, or a combination of records or evidence that you found that might be something entirely different than either survey that the 2 surveyors were contemplating, but it would be in that both could agree with. So I don't know. I hate to see the pincushion, but on the other hand, I would rather that the public know that we aren't agreeing than to. So I know I've had surveyors come by and pull up some pins from time to time, and that's a no-no with me.
So in Nevada, we have a state statute that we're required to reach out to another surveyor if we have a discrepancy with their monument. And so I don't know how many, that'd be an interesting, law or research to see how many states require you to reach out to another surveyor if you're disagreeing with them. If you're going to call them off, you're supposed to reach out to them. And so, and figure out, like you say, come up with a resolution of why their monument is off or whatever. But And then the flip side, back to the pincushion effect for those that are on, we sent an email. I sent an email with Trent on there as well, but asking for permission to do it. And the best part is Lucas didn't tell us no. We just needed to go through a couple of an NDA type of thing. Because what I asked him for was basically a PDF copy of his book so that we could do a screen share like we do now. And so he just wants us to do an NDA. And he's also thinking that these conversations will turn in to a really good second edition for the pincushion effect as well. So the good part of that is he didn't tell us no, and we're still working on it. And we told him we have until September. So we have a couple months to figure this out, but that is the plan. So
Yep, looking forward to that.
yep.
We actually had him on last or 2 years ago for one of the
Yep.
attorney portions of evidence and procedures, and so
Yep.
it'd be great to get him
Yep.
on more regularly as part of this if we do his book. So,
And he promised not to take over the conversations, which we all know he's going to.
great, it makes my life easier to moderate, right?
Yeah,
That's all-
heck yeah.
that's all the talking.
Heck yeah. So I love it. All right. Well, we're down to 50 minutes left there, and we've only got through 2 paragraphs.
Yep. Well, I wasn't lines of title versus occupation. We've talked a lot about this in past chapters, in the past book, and he spends quite a bit of time talking about shifts in land. And so I don't want to spend a ton of time in that, because I want to talk about really writing descriptions and how we do that. And we've had some discussions about rivers and title things, not title, but title, riparian rights and how those move and land movement. So I don't want to go through much on here, but there may be a difference between what the occupation is versus what the document says. And so we've got to look at,
I was going to say simple, just my CAD file, right? That's the prime example. Yeah.
Trent's CAD file to the river moves and it's tied to a boundary, and now the title might move with that. So just some things to keep in mind in our box of evidence that we go through and evaluate is there's many reasons why occupation may not match what that deed says. And so you've got to gather that information and make a determination of why. And then if you are writing some sort of new description, how do you write that to show what you're tying to and referencing? And so that's all I wanted to say about that, because then he gets into on 11.35 here, positive calls versus afterthoughts. And I want to spend quite a bit of time here talking about that. So I'm just going to read it. It's 2 paragraphs here. It says, too many times a statement is made in a description intended to qualify a point or a line or a condition, but that statement follows sometimes several lines after that thing it qualifies. Such a placing of that type of declaration gives the impression that it was just an afterthought, a supplementary, unimportant matter that just happened to come to mind of the scrivener after he passes the point where it was pertinent. In this way, the qualification loses its punch and might even be declared ineffective. If a point or line is to be controlled by a tie to a physical monument, in a line on a map, a boundary deed, etc., then make that call a positive statement and place it in the description at the position to which it applies, not at a later point. And I want to cover this because we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to spend some time seeing how you guys recommend doing this. Is if you have a qualifying call, bearing a distance to something, how do you guys write that? How do you prefer doing that? How do you make sure that you show your intent in writing this description, that this is an important piece of it?
Double calls and that kind of stuff, right? So, yep. Calls to deeds, calls to roads, calls to northerly right-of-ways, westerly right-of-ways. Yep.
This is Joey Waltz. I really like if I call to a certain corner. I actually just did this today. I called to the corner, and I also, kind of like what Trent was saying about double calls, I will name the corner in a different way. So instead of saying just the westerly corner of lot 51, being the southerly terminus of that line, blah, blah kind of thing.
Absolutely. And putting that, he makes this very specific point saying, put these together. And I can't think of any deeds where we've got a bearing a distance call and some sort of qualifying call afterwards where it kind of gets lost in it. And maybe that might be stuff that he experienced more in California, but generally speaking, the call goes with the qualification calls goes with the measurement call there.
Where I see this happen sometimes is when you're using a curve as a part of a description.
Yeah.
Incorporating the components of the curve. They're saying thence, along a curve, and then you give all the information about it, and then the distance after that information. So it's not really clear which element of the curve that you're fixing to follow, because you're separated. You said thence so many feet along along a curve to the right. Said curve having, and then give the components for it. And I think that's what you're getting at, because when you separate that stuff, you kind of interrupt the flow of the description, and then you kind of left scratching your head as well. Do I go along the chord or am I going along the curve? Because it's not really clear from the way a description is put together. So that's a real common one that I see.
Okay, that would make sense. And the one that came to my mind is really what he's trying to tell us to do. And what Trent kind of pointed out is the double call. And I've seen some double calls that they're really poorly written, that you read through it and you don't realize that you're on a double call, right? And it's, to a point which bears this from a section corner or something like that. But the way it's all jumbled in there, all of a sudden you're halfway through the description, like, this just does not make sense. I'm way off over here. And it's because you wrap back around to a point of beginning or call that way. And then you've got to, so writing that in a clear and concise way to let someone know that that's a qualifying call, with a tie to a point or a tie to something. The one I see quite often is, bearing distance to a point which is 600 feet south of another point, thence north 600 feet to that same point you just called. And it's like, well, you're saying you're south at 600 feet. So I go south, but you're really meant to go north, and there,
Yeah, those are
precision
the
in language
confusing.
is important.
Yeah, I was gonna say those, and you definitely, it seemed like those were written, that was kind of the norm, 40, 50, 60 years ago, in writing that, beginning at a point that is, north 600 feet from the section corner type thing, right? And instead of beginning at this, west quarter, thence north 0 degrees to the point of beginning type of stuff, like, it was always, I would say some of those older deeds are definitely more confusing to read when you're like beginning at a point north, north of this west quarter.
Yep. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Or calls that just say westerly from, right? There's, what is westerly? Westerly along an arc. I had one today and I'm like, I can't recreate this.
Yep.
It was so poorly written. I couldn't even go backwards to recreate it. So there we go. There's some positive calls versus afterthoughts. And we may have some afterthoughts too, some clarifying words to say, this is how I resolve the deed, resolve the description, things that, I've written where I've rewritten a description for a subdivision that has a bunch of parcels in there and they didn't fit perfectly, or there were some things we had to do to make it fit occupation and that, or boundary line agreements. And then at the bottom of that, I'll say, also encompassing these parcels are also intended to do this. They were those were the afterthoughts, but they weren't those true qualifying calls where we're bounding it to something. But I just want to give clarity to what I had written above.
Yep.
Okay. Condominiums. Evidence of this type of ownership has been found in history so far back as 6th century BC in Rome. So we've got a couple condo plats coming through our office right now, and I've been dreading it because they can get complicated. And we've had some new laws in Utah pass and some model examples through the UCLS of how to do condominium plats in themselves. But curious to throw out regionally, what do you guys experience? What are the regulations in condominiums? How do we describe those for you guys?
We've got some crazy examples, at least in Southern Nevada, which I mean really came from Southern California, but you know, a lot of the utilities being within common elements, right? And so your unit that you're buying is the interior walls of unit 1A or whatever, right? And so you're basically modeling a kind of a 3D airspace, and then everything else left is basically common elements or utility quarters and that kind of stuff. So I could probably spend a couple seconds and try to find one really quick while we let everybody else chit chat. But yeah, we have some wild mapping ones in Southern Nevada.
Yeah, and Utah's kind of the same way. We've had some requirements in the way we model them on a plat, right? Let's just go modern day condominium. You know, example is we actually do have, you know, vertical relief of the condominium, and you know, here's the space between the walls, here's the space above the unit, and this is the common area, this is the you know, this is the occupied one. We just recently did it out of one of my other offices. It had a parking garage and everything. It was like an 18-20 page plat that lined out every parking in the garage is common space, and we had to do all the levels of the parking garage. I mean, there was like 9 pages of just parking garage levels. It was absolutely insane. But how about some older, have you guys ever experienced any older condominium plats or descriptions? As we talk about descriptions here, in my mind, it's pretty cut and dry of my experience. It's all of unit 1A of this condominium plat, right? But anything you guys have experienced to share for the young surveyor that might be things to note with a condominium plat and retracing those, or even weird descriptions you guys have seen?
Well,
In Arkansas, they don't have apartments or condos yet. There's still straw huts out there.
they didn't have any. They didn't have any condos in the county that I had most of my private practice in. When I worked for engineering companies in the around Little Rock, there were a lot of condominiums. But Arkansas at that time, and this was a long time ago, 1970s, they had some rules, and I can't remember right now whether they were state oriented or probably city county regulations that had a requirement for a particular kind of layout for condominiums, and it was the rules were structured kind of like a specialized lot survey, subdivision plat. It was a subdivision plat, but the rules for creating it and what was shown on it was particular to condominiums. And then those units in the condominium were labeled and bought and sold by those labels, I guess. So it's been a long time. I don't remember that much about it.
This plat's actually 24, 25 years old. This was done in 2000. So, I mean, this is some older drafting, but it gives you a good kind of perspective. But there's, like you said, there's your sheets with, you know, just garage levels, right? And who's parking in what floor and what spot. So I was gonna pull up the deeds. It's taking a second to load. This was a big file, but pull up some deeds and see how the reference. I'm sure it's like you say, Trent, it's just buying a certain unit per that final map. Yeah, see, here's unit 105.
And he gives some examples in the book. And I have one more to show after you close this one down. But he says, you know, you have all of unit 1A, but then you have an undivided, you know, let's say there's 4 units in the townhome, an undivided 1/4 interest in the open space. That's 1137 there, example 1, right?
Yep.
A condominium compromise of parcel 1, an undivided interest in and to lot blank. So you have your unit, but then you also have an interest in the common area there.
Yep.
So I'm going to share. Can I share here? Do you have
Yep.
this open for
Good
me?
to go.
Let's it's on the other screen so I can see it. So this is our 19 page. So limited common. This is the convertible and expandable area, they called it. But if we just go through here, each level, so there's a basement is common, limited common, some convertible space, which is commercial in this case. And then each floor is a unit 401. And then the roof space. And then you've got the vertical there of everything, all the floors.
That's a new one to me, Trent. What's the difference between common and limited common?
So common is open really to everybody. So you would think, and Harmony threw in here townhouse, and that's where we do limited common quite a bit in townhomes. So townhome, you have a rectangle you own, right, which is your townhome unit. And often you'll have green space that completely surrounds it that's maintained by an HOA. But we'll put a limited common, maybe the driveway is a limited common because it's not open to everybody. Only you get to park your car there in front of your unit. So you don't own it fee title, but you have a right to park your car there and limit other people from parking their car there. And we'll often do like a 10 or 15 foot limited common on the back of it for your little porch area and your patio, right? That you can really kind of stop people from going back there and sitting on your back patio, but you don't own that fee title.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, ours is at that map I just looked at. We have same thing. The balcony is an LCE, limited common element as well. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, and then you got the parking areas. So that was an interesting one. Luckily, I didn't have to do this one, but there's, I mean, we've graphicked out, and this is kind of the state statute and our UCLS minimum standard of care example of how to do a condominium plat. But this is one that we did here in our company. So, and a good example of condos there.
Harmony, the one I pulled down is just a public record off of our recorder's website. I can send you something if you want. And it looks like Trent's is probably not recorded. It's just being processed or something, but
Yeah, I don't know where it's at. It's not
Yeah.
mine, but it was shared with me as I prepared to do a condo plat up here. So
yeah, I can shoot that to you in an email, Harmony.
So in Harmony through townhomes, we'll just take a second there. Like I was saying, a townhome is you usually own the rectangle of the townhome, but you own everything from wall to wall. If the townhomes are, if it's a multiple unit townhome, a fourplex, usually there's some sort of solid barrier type division wall between there, a sound wall, and there really are separate units, both for construction and fire and other things, but you own everything. You own inside the walls. We're in a condo space. The way I describe it is you really own drywall to drywall in a 3D space of that room. And what's inside the walls generally then is some sort of common or limited common area for the utilities and HOA maintenance. And that's a really dumbed down version of it. It gets a little bit more complicated depending on the type of condo and what you can do inside of that unit. Okay, any other questions, thoughts about condos? Sounds like that might be a new thing for some people out there. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that we've got some new things to talk
It's
about.
the high urban areas.
Yep. And then, so the next thing on here, if we're just jumping over to 11.39, he talks about coordinates. He says the first paragraph there were no coordinates, controls, or grids in the early days to which to tie survey points. The earliest survey work on baselines for the beginning of triangulation, which led to the use of coordinates, was in 1816, and it was interrupted for 14 years by lack of funds. We're running an interesting in my office is I've hired a new crew chief that has worked for companies for a long time that do state plane, turn on the GPS and kind of run. But our company standard procedure is to do a 5,000 local site calibration. We've got a lot of reasons why we do it that way. And so there's this learning curve here with him of, we send him out on a new site and I'm like, hey, go calibrate to this. And he opens up my points. He's like, this is nowhere near, because he's just turned on the GPS and the points are clear off in La La Land, right?
Just 2,000 miles south.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had a discussion of like, okay, like this is why we do it this way. We have a reason to do it. And so coordinates are really kind of tricky because even at a state plane level, which is this published coordinate system, there's a lot of error that can come in there and datums and translations and shifts and how do you set up your equipment and when did you set up your equipment, and set up the project. And so coordinates have a lot of risk in there, and they're also in the rules of construction one of the lowest things we look at too. I know Jerry, I think, showed one that actually had a deed with descriptions in one of our previous discussions. I've never seen any deed that actually has coordinates, but there are a couple cities in which I work that require a coordinate on the plat map. And it's always a challenge then to take our 5,000 and move it over then to something that they'll actually accept at the city.
Reno, the city of Reno does that. They require coordinate values on a plat to start. So you have like kind of a beginning point type.
Yeah, I've seen plats where they had two sets of coordinates on there to define really it's their basis of bearings, and then they go from there. But yeah, coordinates are just there's too many different ways you can get the coordinates to and then have to explain, well, okay, where did your coordinates come from? I mean, here in Orange County, we've got so many different epochs of coordinates that you're dealing with. If you don't get them right, or you leave it to human error to do a typo on the coordinates, it's just a waste of time, and it just makes it more confusing. So I've seen coordinates. I've seen plenty of them that had coordinates on them for starting points, but yeah, we'll never, hopefully not see that as a common practice.
Trent, when you say that the local municipality requires that they be on there,
Yeah.
whatever their purposes are, do you put a disclaimer on there that says these coordinates are not are to be used for descriptive purposes or anything along those lines?
They don't know. It's literally like it's to tie it down to their GIS. So that's what that's why we're putting it on there. Yeah.
Yeah, but once it appears on a survey map,
Yeah.
then that becomes information that you're certifying too. And that's what I'm wondering if you put a disclaimer on that. Say the only reason these coordinates are here is because they're required by local ordinance or whatever, and are not to be used for descriptive purposes.
Yep. So we got one. I just got this one's up, and I laughed, but we have its local jurisdiction that is now asking horizontal control plans that get submitted with civil plans to be stamped by an LS. We have another jurisdiction where we have to do like a full quarter breakdown and show the monuments and the property corners to be set after construction, all these different things. So another jurisdiction starting to follow behind them and start to require it. Well, I get an email from the engineer today. It says, hey, North Las Vegas needs a horizontal control plan stamped by an LS. And he's like, I just need this stamped.
That's nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Right.
want $1 million, but I'm not gonna get that either.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah. By the way, I've got this building plan that needs an engineer's stamp.
yeah, I know. Right. And so you look at his drawing, all he has is a bearing, and he's like, oh, I put everything together. All you have to do is sign it. And this is it. This is the horizontal control plan.
Nice.
Yeah.
Detailed.
4 decimal places on the coordinates. I like that.
He can
Yeah,
measure
yeah.
accurately,
I'll be
man.
damned. That
he's
is
good.
nailed down tight, man.
serious.
That's me.
He's serious. So well, this is, there's your ones about providing coordinates, right? To Jerry's point. What's up with those coordinates? Where do they come from? But this is our kind of our local basis bearing, because we do have an LDP for this particular jurisdiction and another jurisdiction. They have an LDP, and so we've been able to piggyback on all that. So it's been pretty nice. But so we're able to at least get there. But this guy's this is the horizontal control plan. So
The coordinates that we had available to us in Arkansas were a lot like what y'all are talking about there. There weren't really anything there that you could use because who knows what you were going to start with and how accurate it was to the state plane. But we did have one thing in Arkansas, and that was the state highway department, and they based all of their work, at least their basis of bearings, was based on state plane coordinates, or based on that system. And so whenever you had a track that bounded on a state highway, you could ask them for a strip map, and you would get, in all likelihood, some bearings there, and the detail of their right-of-way maps could be followed by making a sunshot, and you could get on the same bearings with those guys, and that was very helpful. Unfortunately, about 98% of the surveyors working in Arkansas didn't even know that the highway department had right-of-way maps. They weren't ever going to request them, and they weren't ever going to use them. They didn't have any idea about how to use them if they had them.
And that's the other hard part with, like, let's just say state plane coordinates. You've got, I'll say, our older school surveyors that they set up a total station on a section corner, got their tri-prism out and backsided another section corner and traversed in, and they understand coordinates, but they don't understand how state plane coordinates work and how they're derived, and how the GPS really does what it does. You know, it's magic to them, and so there's even just an understanding behind that that's really difficult to put coordinates in. And so I know a lot of people shy away from that, and here in anywhere from 1 to 10 years, we may have new coordinate systems that come out across the United States. And so, then everything changes again, right? And if you've got a coordinate system on a map that you're using today, and 15 years from now, someone's retracing it, they've never worked in an AD 83 system, do they know how to even go back and forth between those? There's quite a bit of risk to that. I've actually gone so far, not so much with coordinates, but even dimensions on my plans. If I'm dimensioning height of a building, or distance to a fence from even a property line, if you will, or a building, I hold all my calls now to a tenth. Our standard template is set up to go to 100th, and I've actually gone through and had our drafters create a style to go to a tenth of a foot, so that I'm portraying the accuracy with which you can retrace it, right? Your crews, where did you shoot the fence? We've got a standard procedure, but there's so much we're certifying to. I'm back old school. I'm like, no, we're going to go to 1/10 of a foot on things, so that it's clear that I'm not measuring 5/100ths of a foot to the fence, and that's how tight my survey is. I'm trying to relax some of that myself.
Gary Kent even just talked about that at the last conference about, he had labeled something to the 100th, and it actually gave him, it ended up being quite the heartburn. And so, he's like, I could have labeled it, to the even foot, or even to the even 10th of a foot, but going to the 100th actually caused him more problems. So, yep.
Okay. Brad threw a question here. What is a major point mentioned by my mentor to the minute 10th?
Yeah.
You're on mute, Brad.
Yeah, you're mute.
Yep. He's typing.
Oh, okay. I think my thing just scooted to here.
Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. I think his mentor is telling him only label to the minute and a tenth. My mentor says that label only to the tenth or the
Yep.
minute, is what he's
Yeah.
just saying there. Yep. So
Absolutely. There's,
Yeah.
you know, the standard of care for what you're doing.
right, standard of care for the area, exactly.
Yep.
But, so
So the last thing in this chapter here, two last things. So we talked about clarity, and I've kind of hounded this point throughout this chapter and throughout the book here is clarity in your writing, clarity in what you're trying to portray. So again, this is just two quick paragraphs here. So I'll read it. Through all of your writing, strive to express yourself in ways that will leave a clear picture in the mind of the reader. After having written a description, set it aside momentarily. Take your attention off of it a while to do something else, and then go back to it and read it as if you had just as if it had just come to you from someone else. See if it leaves the correct impression on you. Are the parts in proper form? Do the exceptions follow in good order? Is each statement, each reference sufficient in itself? If the parts are sufficient, the whole will be sufficient. Are the beginnings well explained? Is the basis of bearings properly established? Are the ties and reference material suitable? Is there any conflict? Another safety valve for checking is to read your description again after having dictated it to your secretary. That's how old school this is. We're dictating to our secretary.
48 years ago.
And after she types it, she may have received a different impression and typed something foreign to your intention. It pays to review it. We've talked about this. Trent said, he's got 3 or 4 people that review it before it gets on his desk. I'll go even have an engineer go type it in just to see someone that's just not familiar day to day with survey stuff, just to see if we can catch any mistakes and clear that up.
I just did one yesterday. Somebody had read it internally a couple of times, and it was running parallel with a lot of things. And so the one that back checked it was a younger one that is just learning how to read it. And everything was like Northwest zeros 23, we'll say, right? And there was one outlier that was North zeros 29. And granted, the numbers and the lines were super small, so it wasn't, it could have moved a 1,000th and it would have changed those 6 seconds. And so I'm reading through them and I'm like, this one just doesn't seem right. So I take it when I get done, I'm like, can you check the line? Because it seems like everything should be 0.23 since it's all parallel and we have this one little outlier. And of course, sure enough, it was, a half a thousandth out of line and, slide it down and everything comes back into play. But it's reading those things and that interpretation of being able to do it. And another one was, I'm reading through multiples. It was vacations of multiple documents. And then we were rededicating stuff, and the dedication was written differently than the vacation. And so I'm like, it was like a 0.13 versus a 0.18. And again, I was like, can you check the CAD work? Because these all should have been the same type of thing. So, but those are the little nuances that sometimes, that you have from not only from a clarity standpoint, but understanding the construction of the document as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But, and then, clarity, going back to this clarity, even all down to contract law, right? Like we've talked about contracts and some of this stuff as well, but
Yeah.
how clarity is your contracts and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I always give the example. When I was a rodman, I just remember we were staking out some road, and like they graded the road out near perfect. So I think all our stakes had a fill of 6/10, and we're like, fill 6/10, fill 6/10, fill 6/10, fill 6/10. And all of a sudden we kind of hit this weird low spot, but you can't really see it. And all of a sudden we had cut a 6/10, cut a 6/10, cut a 6/10, and then back to these fills. And we just rolled through it with a fill through everything, right?
Uh-huh.
And of course, the contractor didn't check it and pour it that the string looked funny.
Yeah.
And we had to buy some curb, about 60 feet of curb there. But it's when you're in this habit of 0.13, like you're saying, 0.13, 0.13, 0.13, you have 0.18. I'm like, hey, well, was that a mistake? Was it a typo, or was that intentionally? And that should pop out to you. You got to be careful of not getting in the habit of always seeing the same thing and assuming then that that's carrying through as well.
Yeah, and then I took those red line comments back, and so when the younger one who was reviewing them, when we got done doing the corrections, I went back and said, these are some things that you need to look for. Like it just seems like a simple thing, but there is, and it literally is thousands of a hundredth or whatever. There's the CAD work, but just this construction of the document, you should read a certain way. So
I like it. I'd love to do a class to see how everyone organizes their CAD work for this and labels layers and tracks it and make sure you're snapping to the right thing. There's so much in the weeds there to do that too. That would be an interesting little lesson to do.
We've labeled some stuff and everybody was like, it's a couple tenths off. We can't figure it out. And the lines were drawn node to node. So it was basically labeling slope distances. And so, those little things that you don't check either. So
it all gets through there. And maybe one of the hard things for us is I don't necessarily get into the CAD sometimes to do it, right? It's been written and reviewed a couple of times and I'm reviewing a document, and it's important to then jump into CAD and look at that stuff. Like you're saying, what's it snapped to? Is it drawn the way I intended to, or we talked through?
Yep.
So great. Well, that gets us through chapter 11 there.
Hey.
So that's pretty awesome here. We've got just a little bit of time left.
I think James wants to do this problem.
Do we want to jump into chapter 12 then and spend 15 minutes in there?
Your call. If we don't finish, it's easier to just kind of, from a recording standpoint, or people coming back to it later, it's easier than breaking it up.
Next week we can get through the next 2 chapters and finish the book easy enough.
Okay. Because
chapter 13 is descriptions of section land, and we've done plenty with that, and I think that will go rather quickly, particularly because we're a heavy West Coast crowd.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd
like to go back and ask Jerry what he was talking about, the metrication.
Oh,
meeting.
Yeah, in the chat.
Politically, in the chat, yeah.
Yeah. He'd grabbed that from Cornell Law, but yeah. So he's looking for that particular word in that meaning there, Jerry.
So politically incorrect. What I don't.
Oh, that was
explain to me, please.
The secretary.
That was the second. We don't have secretaries anymore. And they're now she's. Well, I do have a comment on metrication, which has nothing to do with what I said before. It's kind of interesting because in Wisconsin, by law, we are, when we convert between foot and meter, we have to use a survey foot definition. And that's by legislation. I wasn't aware if other states had that kind of stuff or not. Well, I was doing a presentation for a group up in Oregon last fall, and come to find out that they used the international foot legislatively, the international foot, for the conversion between the foot and the meter. So there is a difference depending where. So where he says in here, there's no problem using meters, that's not true. For short distances, it doesn't make a difference, but it's a 1 in 5,000, 500,000 difference. Now, when you're talking about state plane coordinates, which are on the order of hundreds of thousands or a million or that type of thing, yeah, it do make a difference which one you're using to convert back and forth. So that's there are bumps in the road with that, and of course with the survey foot going away with the new datum redefinitions and stuff like that, that's going to cause some ripples in some of the existing legislation and that type of thing. And I don't necessarily agree with the angles of the bearings are all still in terms of the hex adjustable system anyway. That's not true. I've run into theodolites that we've gotten from Europe that are in grads and centigrads, which are very close to degrees, but are different than. So there are some issues with respect to that. So we can't just make a blanket statement that it's going to be the same regardless of where you go. All right, that's it. Okay, where'd you get that from, Trent?
I had found this years ago when I worked for a nationwide company. We had to be careful which state we were in and what we were using. So I just Googled this real fast.
Oh,
state
okay.
plane, U.S. survey foot versus international foot requirements. So there are a few states that do have some requirements, Michigan
Um,
being one of those.
Nebraska has no conversion. Hawaii has no conversion. Alaska has none. Alabama has none. You will not use the metric system in those states.
There was in the early 90s, I think it was late 80s, but mostly early 90s, Utah actually made a push, or the DOT made a push to go to the metric system. And
Yeah.
it
Oh.
was a horribly failed experiment because contractors didn't understand it and quoted things wrong and lost tons of money.
We had the same thing happen in Wisconsin, and oh my God, what a fiasco! Because highway contracts are let out yearly. I mean, you don't do the entire highway in 1 year; you do it in phases. So all of a sudden, you had all these contracts that existed on the imperial system, and then the ones that were butting up to them, which were on the metric system. And then you had, like, say, the contractors couldn't make the conversion because, say, a number 4 rebar means something in the imperial system. It doesn't mean jack in the metric system and stuff. They had all these problems. Plus, some of those guys aren't working in decimal feet; they're working in inches, and eighths of inches, 16ths of an inches, and that type of thing. So then DOT, after about 5 years, relented and went back to the imperial system, but the contracts that were still out there on the metric system had to be done in the metric system. So you had these highways that were imperial, metric, all the way going down and stuff, depending on where the contracts were. It was a mess. It was a terrible mess.
Here's
when this,
another argument for the 5,000. You can avoid a lot of some of these issues.
Do you know when the first national legislation was passed for us to go metric in this country was?
Before 70s?
1976.
1860s. It was
Oh,
in the
okay.
1860s. What do we got to show for it? Liter bottles of soda. That's what we got to show for it. You can't buy a quart of soda anymore. You can buy a liter bottle of soda.
2 liter.
It just is. Let's pick something and go with it, for goodness sakes.
this legislation hit Arkansas in, I guess, the late 70s or early 80s. And the Surveyors Association really came down on the surveyor's foot definition for the meter. Unfortunately, we had a guy that was the state land surveyor at the time or whatnot, had an educational background. And instead of following what he should have promoted with a new law as a U.S. survey definition, he went with he went with the other, and so that's what the state put into law, and so it left all of the surveyors kind of scratching their head about it. Luckily, most of us didn't have to make that conversion very often.
Okay,
Funny.
great discussion. And isn't the new state plane coordinate system the base definition is now a meter international foot definition, if I'm not mistaken.
It will be, yep.
Well, yeah, the survey foot's going away. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's
Yep.
so it's going to be strictly a straight meter definition.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the tenths of the foot that all surveyors use because it's halfway to meters, at least in theory it is. But it's when I got to work with contractors that want to use inches that I get mixed up. Don't give me inches. Okay, guys. Well, appreciate you. This was a great discussion, great wrap up to this chapter, and one more week and we'll get through this book.
There we go. That'd be awesome.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.